Hello friends, today Scorcher Toys at anymoon.com is taking a look at the B2Five VR-52F and T Mospeada Ride Armor or Robotech Cyclone toys. If you like what you see, click the comments below. You'll see a link to Big Bad Toy Store where they currently, as of the time I'm filming this, have them available for $54.99 US. You might be thinking, bro, are these the same toys that came out in November and December of last year? And the answer is yes. And I'm sorry, I'm slowly working my way out of my backlog here. English or Japanese packaging, the results are exactly the same for these two releases. Someday I'll compare Yellow to its Mega House incarnation. But just a heads up, go with the English version of the B2Five Yellow toy. They realized a little late that they had a left-right packaging snafu, so they threw in some extra bracers for the English version to resolve the issue. Getting back to the toys we're looking at today. When you slide the tray out of the box, you're probably going to whimper at the sight of the so many tiny parts. But I'm here to tell you to be brave, and we're going to get through this together. You can get some of your chill back by immediately assembling the included display stand because 10 of these tiny parts relate to the display stand, and of those, 2 of the pieces are extra. Next, go ahead and put your bracers together. It's so simple, you'll wonder why it wasn't already done for you. In the middle, we have 2 fairing holders. One should come installed on the toy, but they left it off for you to do. The other part is an extra for the 41H, which is a different toy in a different package, so you don't need it at all. Now, put the visor on the helmeted head. If B2Five had done these things for you, the tray would look more like this when you opened it. And suddenly, it's not intimidating at all, it's downright accessible. We're left with 3 different guns for the 52F toy, a bike stand, saddlebags, maneuver jets for armor mode, an adapter to plug the bike into the display stand, and 2 pairs of additional fixed posed hands. The contents are essentially the same for Ray or Rand, except the black heavy cannon is gone, replaced by the parts to put together the integrated bracer gun. I don't normally jump right into the negatives on a toy review, but for this toy, I'm gonna make an exception. When you first pull the motorcycle out, it doesn't look terrible. There's a big gap here, but there's gonna be a rider there, and it's a very small toy, so I can forgive that. As we look at the front of the toy though, we have black stickers where we should have either headlights or sensors, so that's a bit of a letdown. And then there's this gap right between the front fairing, and so that is why we get an extra part, and this is just an annoying solution to me on a few levels. To install your fairing holder, you're gonna pull out in a way and then rotate up the fairing and then pull your wheel off to the side. Now this is all fine. And you know what? I don't mind that there's this core here that is not perfect transformation. And I do have a separate transformation guide. Do check that out. But this chunk here, we're just gonna put this aside when we go into armor mode. But for now, we're pulling it out, and we're going to have to install this fairing holder piece, and that just goes on there like so. And as I said, would have been better if these were already pre-installed, but just saving some bucks, I get it. The other thing that you would have to pull this out for is your display stand connector for bike mode, which is this piece right here and pegs in underneath. So both of these things, you have to kind of disassemble the toy to get them in there. And for me, what I have found is this front fairing holder is way too effective. So if I put this on here now, and then I have to bring my fairings up and over, and what you can see, ignore that, is that the fairing
doesn't really fit naturally onto that. So there we go. We got that one on, bringing this one over, and it's just an incredibly tight fit that usually involves a lot of back and forth and cursing, and it's just very unpleasant, and it doesn't need to be, right? If they had made this somewhere lower down and then you push it up when the fairing was in the proper position and then that brought them together, that would be great. But instead, you have to fight to get it over the clip. Once you do, nice and tight. But now when I'm ready to transform the toy, I've got my fairing pinned in that holder, and I'm gonna have to fight and wiggle, and it's just super frustrating experience when they could have had these pegged together, or like I said, slide something up, or have pegs on the bottom of the windscreen that went into the fairings. There's 100 different solutions that I think they could have implemented that would have saved me so much frustration there. And the same thing for that stupid little connector at the bottom here, right? The fact that I can't just plug it in is super annoying, but why not just have a slot somewhere that could peg right into the display stand, and then we don't have to go through that rigmarole. So some frustrating aspects. Yeah, it's tiny, but I think there were smarter solutions that could have been implemented. But is it a good representation of the line art? Not particularly, but you know what? For the size and for the fact that this tiny thing does transform, I was honestly impressed. It's not bad. It's just no beagle or something like that. Now there are some nice paint applications here. We get Mars base insignias. We got some stripes, some more insignias there. We got a little black accent. We even got little gauges up here, and the handles here being silver. So, you know, overall there's some nice attention to detail, and I did appreciate that. You do also get spinning tires, which is great. Now, one of the things that I didn't like was how low this crotch piece came down, and you do have these hip armors that are pegging into it. Now on this toy, I was like, you know what happens if I push that up? The answer is really nothing. The tabs float. This piece is no longer so low down. Tire still spins just fine. So if that's something that also bothers you, there is a little workaround to it. These toys do come with a very basic display stand, and honestly, after the tiny little sliver of plastic Mega House gave us, and that rickety little, scaffolding that CMs gave us, this is tiny and effective, and I really appreciate it. The only thing it doesn't do for you is banking, and I said earlier that the display stand comes with a couple extra parts, but this here is what you could do with those extra parts, and if you put the bike on, that allows you to get some banking on the display stand. So there's another cool little extra for you. And overall, very solid handling of the bike, so I appreciate that as well. B2Five has a 1/28 scale universe with lots of different figures, and sometimes it works out pretty cool. This is a Stronghold mech from the Acid Rain series. Here I've got the Mosquito Pilot figure in there. Now unfortunately, these Mosquito Pilot figures have huge kneecaps on them, and that's gonna make it so they don't really seamlessly work with some items. Like here, you can't fit it in the Stronghold. Let's see if it works. Here we have a Scope Dog from Votoms. And if I don't think I can squeeze him in here either. So the Mosquito figures, wall 1/28 scale, common with a lot of these other mechs that B2Five has. They're not gonna work out so great in fitting in because they do have larger proportions on the lower half of the body. I'm sure the forearm armors aren't gonna help them out either. Now, you can still take your figures from other lines and use them with these Mosquito figures. Like here is Chirico on the motorcycle here, and that works out pretty cool. So if you've ever wondered what it'd be like if Chirico could ride a ride armor, here you go. Now the other thing here, I've got the saddlebags attached. Here's the saddlebags, and each one of these has a piece that pops off. Sometimes easier than others. Let's get that off. Okay, so we can pop this part free, and then that leaves a slot right there. So now if I put this back on the toy, and I could do the same thing with the top here, remove it and show a slot, and then you could take these common weapon sizes here, and you can plug them into the holes you create, and that allows you to swap in some accessories from other toys you may own. So that's the benefit of the 1/28 scale. Again, a little clunky. It doesn't work perfectly because of some of the idiosyncrasies of Mosquito's REF outfit, but otherwise, a little cool extra for you. There's something special about transformation where the boots extend. Now, you would imagine they extend up this way, but it's a weird thing that happens with ride armors. I've never really understood, but it might be the reason why the Mosquito figure is a whole head taller than the Acid Rain figures. And that's the other reason, besides these bulky knees and feet, that these figures are not going to fit in the cockpit of other 1/28 scale B2Five figures. So again, you can have fun taking these guys and putting them on your motorcycles, but if you wanted to see Stick ride a Scope Dog or any of your other B2Five 1/28 scale mechs, it's probably not going to happen. So if you got a big collection, maybe that's a little bit of a bummer, but now you know. So this raises the question, are they even 1/28 scale? They're going to stand 7.7 centimeters, and while if you have the rider out standing next to your other B2Five figures, it might look a little funky. Once you put the ride armor on the toy, then it makes sense that it's going to tower over some of your B2Five figures. So maybe that's not such an issue. If it's on a bike, you can't really tell anyways. The CM's toy looks like this next to it. Remember, this is a 1/18 scale ride armor figure. And then we have the Mega House figure here. This is 1/15 scale. This is 7.7, 10.3, and 12.5, I forget. But you could see they're about right as far as those scales go. So close enough. If you actually do the math, this guy's more like 1/24 scale, but I don't think that's going to be too much of a hang up for most collectors. These character figures are small, but they are very impressive in both how they handle and how they feel. You've got the ball jointed head, which is incredibly stiff, lets you look way down and lets you look a pretty good distance up. You can see there's a little slant to the neck. It all works very well. You can bring the shoulders up and you can bring them forward. Here you go, there's like a ball joint there. So all good things with the shoulder. And then you have a twist point right at that shoulder too, because there's a peg that comes into the bicep. And then you have your just a little more than 90-degree elbow. It's just a hinge there. The gauntlet, this was nice, can rotate around on the forearm. So that really helps out for armor mode. And again, all of this is impressive at the size. It's better than CM's and Mega House did in their larger size. You have a nice pivot for the chest and back, which is good. Rotation point at the waist. You have your ball jointed hips, and you get a rotation point right below the hip, which is great. You have more than 90 degrees at the knee, which is also very good. And then you have a ball joint at the foot that can pivot in and out and twist and go up and down. So really, really good articulation. And as I'm handling the toy, note that nothing is falling off. This thing is solid. The hands peg in and can pull out, and that might be useful as you put them on the handlebars. There's no rock, but otherwise great there. So I am really enthused. This is great. And it's a big step up from like the Acid Rain figures where you had the elbows popping off and things like that. This is great. I am very happy with just the rider figure. The toy comes with the helmetless head on there, and it is a fine approximation given the size. Remember, these are really small, and I'm going to show you some pretty big close-ups right here. So yeah, it might not look the best when you're right up against it, but when it's in your hand, being the size it is, it's perfectly fine. But you might want to put the helmet on. Sure, why not? The helmet comes on this torso piece you need for armor mode. I do have a separate transformation guide I'm going to show you. So definitely subscribe and check that out separately. But in the meantime, we can pop this head right off. It's just a ball joint. And then we can pop this head right off and swap this on, which is great. Looks good. Now, the only bummer here is that this helmet does not have a functional visor. Instead, this is a plug-in piece. There is a face sculpt underneath there, and this is somewhat transparent, so you can kind of see that face sculpt behind it. But unfortunately, it would have been really cool if there was a functional visor. I guess this is another one of those concessions for the size, but at least it looks good. You do get a few optional guns to fight off those bad guys that might be threatening your little rider figures. You get this gun, which has the stock included. And the cool thing here is that they grip onto that same hand that grabs the handlebar, so no special hands for guns or anything like that. We just go ahead and clip that in, and there you go, pew, pew, pew. If he needs a little more assistance, wants to go John Woo style, here's the other gun, and now you can totally fight off any bad guys heading your way. And it's going to give you some cool options for the displays you might want to set up. And of course, the last thing we need to settle in bike mode is, can the character figure even ride the bike? And yeah, absolutely you can. There's lots of natural looking positions you can put the rider on where it'll look like they're riding the motorcycle. And once they're on there, they're going to be really sturdy. So big props there. Very happy with the riding the bike ability of this toy. Even with the saddlebags on, I was able to get a pretty natural looking pose. So high marks there. Check out my separate transformation video. Let's go to armor mode. So I do have a separate transformation guide. I'm really hoping you've checked it out to understand the parts forming aspects of this. But cliff notes, you remove this section from the bike. If you got a 52T, this little part holds on the gun to the bracer, so you're gonna remove that too. And you're gonna swap out the chest from this one, which doesn't have little slots here and doesn't have the straps underneath, to one that does. And you're gonna pull out these maneuver jets, which go on the side. Now, I earlier really ranted against this fairing holder. I'm gonna just say, when I transform my Stick or Scott toy, it's much less of an issue than it is for my Rand, so you might luck out and not have it be as frustrating to you. If you got a few of them though, you're probably gonna end up in the same boat with me, and you might just be unlucky in general. One question always is, can the toy stand on its own? Because obviously, a ride armor toy holds a lot of weight on the backpack. The answer is yes. Like other ride armor toys, it helps to do a little lean forward or come up with a dynamic pose that brings that center of gravity forward to help you out. And that is certainly the case here. As we look at the toy from the side, you can see all of that weight hanging off the back. Definitely a weakness of the sculpt here, or just the design. The back is ugly. There's this big hole here, shows off transformation mechanisms. And we end up with this windscreen that's really high up and floating. If I'm gonna nitpick, I would also say that the wheels end up a little far apart, although I'm happy with the height of them. And then I would say overall from the front, which is really the view that matters for most people, I am really happy with this toy. Again, the chest sensors would have been nice, but I do think it's doing a really good approximation of the line art. And it's even more impressive when you consider how small this toy is and how well it's holding together. So if I hold this toy right now and I shake it and I pose it and do all sorts of things with it, you'll notice nothing is flying off this toy, which is not what I can say for previous CMs and Mega House toys. Now the armor itself is going to impair your articulation a little bit. And I did notice one little weird idiosyncrasy here. The hip armors, the one on the left side can flare way out, and the one on the right side less so. So if you're looking for a really aggressive stance, you end up a little cocked, which is weird. But you do have it, so it can extend far enough out that you can get a nice aggressive stance, as long as you don't go too crazy with your splits. Now, the crunch effect and the twisting waist, both of those are eliminated by the armor, so you won't be able to do that. But that is not going to stop you from having a lot of fun still with some crazy poses and some dynamic displays. I know parts forming bums people out, so if you don't want to use the maneuver jets and you're wondering what it looks like without them, there it is on the Ray toy on the right. Personally, I don't think it looks terrible. It looks a little more polished on the left, but you can get by without the maneuver jets if you wanted to. One other quick note as I pull out Ray's toy here. Holds the gun, everything looks good over on that side. I also put an acid rain rifle into his hand, which is another big plus for this 1/28 common scale. There's a lot of handguns out there in this scale for acid rain figures, which means you put them in the right armor, you could have a lot more fun display options there as well. Now we've had a few different ride armors at this point that came with some sort of a display stand, but the B2Five display stand really is much better in comparison to a lot of those. What I've done here is I've taken the arms from two different toys, put them together to get a real high flying pose. And here you can see I've got the whole Scott launching his missiles, Stick launching his missiles pose, and it's working out great. I really enjoy this. You don't get the little heads up display that some of the bigger toys would have. At this scale, it would be such a tiny thing, you would probably lose it instantly. But there you go. I think this looks great. I really enjoy that this display stand gives me a lot of flexibility and stiffness here, and I can rotate it, right? So this adds to the fun factor for sure. So yeah, they're small, it's a weird scale, but they're cheap, and that puts them in competition with CMs and Mega House. The CMs toys, they fell apart all the time. Mega House toys, really poor build quality there and some questionable decisions as well. So if it's just those two you're in the market for, then I think this is a pretty easy recommendation. Yeah, some people are going to be like, hey, it's fiddly, but in armor mode and in bike mode, it holds together pretty well. So the transformation, okay, whatever it is, what it is, not perfect. But once you get to where you're going, these things can be pretty fun. So I like them. I think they're gonna scratch a particular itch. If you've got the money, you're gonna go with a Sentinel or maybe even a Beagle toy. But in that mid or low price range, this I would say is now your new best bet. Check out the full article on anymoon.com. Subscribe. If you like the video, give me a thumbs up. And thanks everybody for watching.